There comes a moment when the life you built begins to feel strangely unfamiliar. Not because everything is falling apart, because you are no longer the person who built it. You feel it before you can explain it. A conversation that used to excite you now feels heavy. A room full of people who used to feel like home now feels quiet, even when everyone's talking. A version of your own life, the one you worked so hard for, suddenly feels like it belongs to someone you used to be. Maybe you've caught yourself staring out a window for a little too long. Maybe you've noticed you're saying yes out of habit, not desire. Maybe you've felt an ache you can't quite name. Not sadness exactly, not fear exactly. Something quieter, something older. Here's what almost no one tells you about growth. It doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like grief. Because before you can become who you're meant to be, the person you've been has to be allowed to end. And if you're watching this right now, if something in your life feels like it's quietly falling away, I want you to know this isn't a warning. It's an invitation. It usually starts small. You walk into a place you used to love, and it doesn't feel the same. You scroll through old photos and barely recognize the person smiling back. You reach for a habit that used to comfort you, a late night, a familiar distraction, a way of numbing the day. And for the first time, it doesn't work anymore. Maybe it's the friend group you've had for years, where the conversations now feel like reruns of a show you've already seen. Maybe it's the job that once gave you identity, but now just gives you a paycheck and exhaustion. Maybe it's a relationship where you're saying all the right words, but something underneath has gone quiet. None of this means you're broken. It means you're becoming someone new, and the old blueprint of your life hasn't caught up yet. Think about a house you've outgrown. The rooms haven't changed, but you have. The doorways feel smaller, the walls feel closer. Not because the house shrank, because you grew. That's what this feels like. Not destruction, expansion. And here's what most people don't realize when this shift begins. It rarely announces itself with fireworks. It shows up in the small, quiet refusals. The dinner you don't want to go to, the show you can't finish, the version of fun that used to define your weekends that now just feels like noise. You're not losing your mind. You're loosening your grip on a version of yourself that no longer fits. Every identity we build is built for a reason. The old you developed habits, defenses, and beliefs because at some point they kept you safe. Maybe you learned to please people because conflict once felt dangerous. Maybe you learned to stay busy because stillness once felt like falling behind. Maybe you learned to shrink your voice because somewhere along the way, being too much cost you something. A relationship, an opportunity, a sense of belonging. These patterns weren't weaknesses, they were survival strategies, and for a long time, they worked. But here's what most people don't realize until much later in life. The strategies that protect you in one chapter can quietly imprison you in the next. The same people-pleasing that kept the peace in your 20s can leave you resentful and invisible in your 40s. The same self-doubt that once made you cautious can, years later, become the very thing standing between you and the life you actually want. So when old beliefs start to feel uncomfortable, when you find yourself questioning things you used to accept without a second thought, that discomfort isn't a malfunction. It's a signal. It means your inner self has outgrown your outer identity, and something in you is quietly asking to be renegotiated. This is why growth so often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. You're not just adding new habits, you're subtracting old armor. And even armor that hurt you can feel strange to remove, because for so long, it's the only thing that made you feel protected. Perhaps this is your invitation to ask a harder question. Which parts of me were built out of fear, and which parts were built out of truth? You don't have to answer that all at once. But the fact that you're asking it at all means something in you is already changing. There is a specific kind of silence that comes right before transformation. Almost no one talks about it, because it doesn't look like growth. It looks like standing still. The old life has stopped fitting, but the new one hasn't arrived yet. You've closed a door on a relationship, a job, a habit, a version of yourself. But the next door hasn't opened. And in that gap, in that strange in-between, it's easy to feel lost. Easy to wonder if you made a mistake. Easy to feel like you're falling behind, while everyone else seems to have it figured out. This is the part of the story no one puts in the highlight reel. The nights where you lie awake, not because something is wrong, but because everything feels uncertain. The mornings where you go through the motions of your old routine, and it feels like wearing clothes that don't fit anymore. The quiet ache of not knowing exactly who you're becoming, only knowing, with complete certainty, that you can't go back to who you were. If this feels familiar, I want you to hear something clearly. This isn't the absence of a story. This is the most important part of it. Every seed spends time in complete darkness before it breaks through soil. Not because something has gone wrong, because that darkness is where the roots are formed. The strength that will eventually hold up the tree is being built in a place no one can see, during a time that looks, from the outside, like nothing is happening at all. You are not behind. You are rooting. And here's what most people don't realize about this silent season. It's not empty. It's fertile. Every question you're sitting with right now, every version of your life you're quietly grieving, every uncertain morning, it's all part of the same process. You are not stuck. You are being prepared. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in real life. Not in theory. In the everyday moments most people don't even realize are signs of transformation. The first sign: you no longer chase everyone's approval. Picture a woman who spent 15 years being the person everyone could count on. The one who said yes to every favor, every event, every request, because saying no felt like risking love itself. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, someone asks her for something she doesn't have the energy to give. And instead of the usual guilt, she feels something new. Relief. She says no, and the world doesn't end. That's not coldness. That's a woman meeting herself for the first time in years. The second sign: you feel drawn toward peace instead of constant excitement. There's a man who used to fill every weekend with noise, plans, parties, constant motion, because stillness used to feel like emptiness. And then one Saturday, he cancels everything, makes a cup of coffee, and sits on his porch doing absolutely nothing. And for the first time in a long time, nothing doesn't feel like loneliness. It feels like relief. The third sign: old habits suddenly feel exhausting. The scrolling that used to numb you now just makes you feel worse. The late nights that used to feel exciting now leave you drained before they even begin. This isn't burnout. It's your inner self refusing to be soothed by things that were never actually healing you, only distracting you. The fourth sign: certain relationships no longer feel aligned with who you are becoming. Maybe it's a friendship built entirely on complaining about lives neither of you have tried to change. Maybe it's a family dynamic where the only role available to you is the one you played 20 years ago. You still love these people, but the conversations feel like an old sweater, familiar, but not the right size anymore. The fifth sign: you are becoming more protective of your time and energy. You start saying things like, "I can't make it," without the paragraph of guilt-ridden explanation that used to follow. Your calendar starts reflecting your values instead of your fear of disappointing people. The sixth sign: you are questioning beliefs you once accepted without thinking. The idea that your worth comes from how much you produce. The idea that rest has to be earned. The idea that love means abandoning yourself for someone else's comfort. You're not rebelling. You're finally examining the blueprint you inherited and deciding what stays and what goes. The seventh and final sign. You feel an unexpected desire to begin again. Not to burn your whole life down. Just a quiet, persistent pull towards something new. A different rhythm, a different city, a different way of speaking to yourself in the mirror. That pull isn't random. If you recognized even one of these in yourself, I want you to notice that. Not judge it, just notice it. That's the version of you that's ready to be met. Here's the part that's hard to say out loud. This kind of growth often feels like loss, even when it's exactly what you needed. You might lose a friendship that no longer fits. You might lose the identity of being the reliable one, the easygoing one, the one who never causes a problem. You might lose a version of your future you had planned around a person or a job or a life that no longer feels true. And it's okay to grieve that. Growth doesn't require you to pretend the losses don't hurt. But here's what most people don't realize until they're standing on the other side of it. Every one of those endings was making room for something your old self couldn't hold. You cannot fill a hand that's already clenched around something. Space has to be made before something new can be placed inside it. The boundary you finally set didn't destroy that relationship. It revealed which relationships were actually built on respect. The job you walked away from didn't ruin your stability. It made room for work that doesn't require you to disappear. The old belief you released didn't leave you exposed. It left you finally able to stand in something true. Maybe what feels like an ending is actually the universe clearing a table that was too crowded to set anything new on. You're not losing yourself. You are finally being allowed to find yourself. I want you to think of today, August 16th, not as a date with magic attached to it, but as a checkpoint. A line in the sand you get to draw for yourself. For many people, transformation doesn't begin with a lightning bolt. It begins with a decision, made quietly, on an otherwise ordinary day. A decision to stop carrying what no longer belongs to you. A decision to ask, honestly, what am I still holding on to out of fear rather than love? You don't need permission from the universe to change your life. But sometimes having a symbolic moment, a specific day you can point back to, makes the decision feel real. So consider this your moment. Not because this date holds power over you, but because you're choosing to hold power over your own story starting now. Think of this as your invitation to release one thing today. One belief, one habit, one relationship you've been carrying out of obligation instead of alignment. You don't have to solve your whole life in the next 10 minutes. You just have to choose one honest act of release. And if this resonates with you, if some part of this video has felt like it was speaking directly to something you've been sitting with quietly, I want you to type it below. I am ready for my new chapter. Not for me, not for the algorithm, for you. Let it be a promise you make to yourself, in writing, on the day you decided to stop waiting. Picture her. Picture him. The version of you on the other side of this season. Calmer, not because life got easier, but because you stopped performing a piece you didn't feel. Wiser, not because you learned something new, but because you finally stopped ignoring what you already knew. More confident, not because the fear disappeared, but because you learned to move forward with it instead of waiting for it to leave. This version of you doesn't need everyone's approval to feel whole, doesn't fill every silence with noise, doesn't mistake exhaustion for productivity or self-abandonment for love. This version of you tells the truth, even when their voice shakes, protects their peace like it's sacred, because it is. Chooses relationships and rooms and routines that actually reflect who they are, not who they had to be to survive an earlier chapter. This person isn't a stranger. This person has been inside you this entire time, waiting for enough of the old noise to clear so they could finally step forward. So here's what I want to leave you with. The old version of you doesn't need to be hated. It doesn't need to be destroyed, resented, or erased like it was a mistake. It got you here. It survived things you don't give it enough credit for. It made choices with the information and the strength it had at the time. It protected you the only way it knew how. So thank it. And then, gently, let it go. Because the life you're growing into was never meant to be carried by the person you used to be. It was always meant for who you're becoming. There comes a moment when the life you built begins to feel strangely unfamiliar. And now you know why. It's not falling apart. It's finally becoming yours.